Hello guys, welcome back to Not Just Mecha. It's Marco here, and today we are going to paint with the secret mind-blowing power of a linear, reasonable workflow. This paint job was clearly inspired by the official box art, but the two triggers that made me obsess over this model for quite a while are way more technical than artistic. First, in the main view, you have two powerful tones from the red macro family, tones that are often very tricky to balance when they sit this close together. And second, the use of true metallic and non-metallic metal at the same time. They said it couldn't be done, and now it's in mainstream painting, in a GW box art. We'll dig into that in a moment. But the key aspect for you is that, procedurally, this time I'm going to be super essential and super linear. No tricks and no gimmicks, just a clean, academic, very intentional back and forth from general to particular. And back again a couple of times. Whenever I approach a paint job feeling not crazily confident, I start with the always reliable ultimate icebreaker, a black and white value sketch. I talk about this all the time in classes and workshops. A painting is a crazy overlap of visual information happening all at once, but procedurally, we are allowed to break that overload of inputs into much more digestible bites. And the best way to start exploring this deep rabbit hole is to work on value alone, without the distraction of colors. It trains beginners on the insane importance of value contrast, gives advanced painters a clean framework to test complex light structures. And a totally random example. It's perfect for a YouTuber who hasn't properly painted in a while to stretch his hand and brain. I'm gentle, progressive and intentional with every pass. This isn't a mindless zenithal spray. This is literally the dramatic light of the piece. The light that structurally will remain as it is in every stage, and that will guide every new layer until the very end. From here, I jump straight into the metallic bits. Metallic paints, even the super fluid and spray-friendly ones, are still very messy when atomized through the airbrush, so using them early is always smart. But honestly, in this case, it's more about the visual render of the different materials. I'll be playing a lot with the nature of each surface, so to get a good final integration, this information needs to be in place immediately. And since I also want the colored reflections and bouncing tones that our brain expects from metal, setting them from the start lets the overspray from later stages create extremely natural tonal variations, and in the perfect spots. But above all, metallics are intrinsically super opaque, so working them now lets me re-render the value sketch while it's still fresh in my eyes. To build depth on these exposed parts, I apply a few generous, transparent washes that lock in the first general, high and mild shadows into flowy, cold tones. Of course, insisting a bit more in the shadow areas. Then I establish a rough general light in key spots using a higher value gold. Now I can block the colors of the other main bits. I set the silver after the reds because I want them less reflective, more dull and therefore less influenced by the reddish reflections. They are not key focal points, so I don't want them stealing attention. To get a more organic look and to use the underpainting proactively, I define the horse's mid-value local tone with a bunch of contrast paints and washes. For me, they are basically the same thing, with just slightly different staining powers. The tonal variety makes the render rich and organic, but as you can see from the palette, I keep all their values in the same territory. That's where real coherence is needed in this stage. Now that the big picture is in place, I feel confident enough to establish the cold, desaturated, greenish tones of the base. With the mid-value mid-tones set, I can move from general to something slightly more particular with some pretty aggressive shading. This, of course, means that I'm starting to introduce the environment's cold lights and shadows into the flow. I want this space to stay in portrait territory, character front and center, while the environment supports the narrative more quietly than my usual. But it still needs to feel like a real setting, with the proper impact on the character entering this particular set or stage. I want a very cold scene where warm, fantasy local tones burst out of icy lights and cold shadows. So I'm sacrificing a bit of chromatic contrast to strengthen the cold swamp storytelling. Magenta seamlessly bridges the warm hues into the cold spectrum. And from there, I can easily pivot into blue to close the deeper shadows. I'm going to render everything that goes from deep midtones to highlights with the brush, except for the core of the powerful orangey red of the cape and robe. Those surfaces in my mind are silky and smooth, so the airbrush simply makes the initial strong value jump more efficiently, and matching the look perfectly, even if later I'm going to apply a bunch of textures. After a light pass of matte varnish used to kill the typical sheen of inks straight out of the bottle, I officially begin to climb into more and more defined textural lights. Your eye naturally goes to the warm reds, but my foundational tones, the ones covering most of the surfaces, are cold, so I need to develop them quite a bit before shifting focus. Side note about the paints I'm using. The veterans of the channel know it already, but I feel the need to refresh it for the newcomers. These are just the paints I personally like, and you don't need to buy anything to follow these tutorials. The important thing is the color theory behind my choices, not the specific pots and tubes. I'm always very textural with the render of my light midtones and first lights. I like to see a certain grit, especially on fantasy models. And honestly, this is the part that I enjoy the most when painting. So I tend to overindulge in it. Still, preferences aside, this is the best technical stage to introduce this kind of information about materials. The slightly high mid-values are where physical textures in the real world stop being swallowed by the darkness of the shadows, and are still not bleached out by the intensity of more powerful lights, standing in that mid-ground that makes them realistically visible to the human eye. The skin is also part of this same block of tones. I want to make it pop thanks to its high value. Check again in the sketch how aggressively white I went on it, and the contrast with the framing warmth all around it. So, being an undead, I'm not scared of pushing the gas pedal on the cold tones. I also do a first pass on the metals before jumping on the reds, because as main focal points I need to modulate their intensity based on the rest of the miniature. As for true metallic coexisting with non-metallic metal, it's a trick I love sneaking into a bunch of pieces, especially split paints. It quickly enhances the richness of materials, and it adds a lot of powerful easy contrast. The combination never really works extremely well in pictures, because of course you don't have a living, moving light source generating the different behaviors, but in real life you get super interesting effects from the interplay of intrinsic, matte and shiny. Still wild that GW is leaning into that for basically pictures, but I totally applaud the heavy metal artist for prioritizing the in-person experience. Respect. Now I can enjoy the work on the red spectrum and the true focal points. And side note, yeah, now that the Mindwork heavy body paints are officially public, I can use them in more tutorials. The important lesson to learn from this stage, way more evident than in the blue one, is again a corollary of what I was saying at the beginning about the beautiful modularity of the painting process, that you really should embrace. Here I'm pushing on values and textures, using textures to deliver those high values. But to reach that kind of extreme light, I need paints containing white, and/or proper white paint, even if my end goal is a super saturated look. In the end, white is the most luminous paint we have in subtractive color mixing. But I've seen a lot of beginner painters stressing about this trade between luminosity and saturation, without realizing that you can totally have both. You just need to establish them in different stages. You'll perfectly understand what I mean in a moment, as soon as the yellow ink comes out. Oh, I honestly almost forgot the exposed bones. I moved from general blocks of colors to localized shadows, to small, sharper and sharper lights and highlights, even down to fabric fibers and tiny scratches. That's the mantra you need to keep in mind, from general to particular. But now I need to recontextualize all this micro-detailing into the big picture. So, back to general again. And the best tool to do this is transparency. A filter with the brush, or a smoothing glaze with the airbrush. Transparency is the key, not the way you apply it. white pass blurs the fake sheen of the non-metal and the silky fabric, softening the textures. Magenta, my first step into deeper shadows, again reinforces and smooths that same information. Yellow is an extra step. We can call it an anomaly. As anticipated, I use it to bring back the fluo-orange vibe of the light vibrant red, whose saturation was weakened by the close to white values I had to use to bring up the light and drama to its maximum. And then I come back to our established colors with a phthalo blue red shade. From general to particular to general to particular again. These passes make the blends smoother and more fluid, but they also soften the highlights, taking away, no pun intended, their edge. So now I re-establish them with super fine micro applications that honestly, being so small and localized, never really take a bunch of time or effort. This leads to the extremely shiny, razor-sharp metallic edges, rendered with a bright, super reflective typographic ink. Basically, real liquid metal. And here is the final result. 4 hours of work with no crazy tricks, gimmicks, or too many exotic materials. Just a solid representation of the effort you might put into a cool, self-standing centerpiece hero for an army. With the extra of being something that doesn't just look good in a photo, but truly comes alive in your hands. And about that circular back and forth between general and particular. Again, I didn't invent anything. This is simply how painting and drawing work, and how they have always been taught in art school. So next time you pick up a miniature, remember that painting is a relaxed, circular dance more than a straight line run, and embrace its wavy flow. If you like this video, give it a like and subscribe. Remember that you can ask me anything down below with a comment, you can follow my projects during the week using one of my socials, or watch me painting live on Twitch. Check the schedule of the streams on the Twitch homepage. And if you want to support my work, check my Patreon page and join the community, or maybe ask for a commission. See you next week, guys!